The morning of June 14, 1944, broke over Carentan with the acrid smell of cordite still hanging in the air. Sister Marie-Thérèse Dubois knelt in the small chapel of Saint-Hilaire Orphanage, her rosary beads clicking softly between trembling fingers. Outside, the sounds of liberation echoed through the cobblestone streets, American voices mixing with French cheers. But inside her heart, there was only dread. She knew what was coming. She had seen it in the eyes of her neighbors yesterday, the way Marguerite Lefebvre had spat at her feet, the whispers that followed her like shadows. Collaborator, they called her. Traitor, the woman who fed Germans while French children starved. The chapel door burst open with a violence that made the candles flicker. Marguerite stood there, flanked by 3 other women from the resistance, their faces hard as the stone walls around them. Behind them, a crowd had gathered in the orphanage courtyard, perhaps 50 people, their voices rising in a chorus of accusation. Sister Marie-Thérèse rose slowly, her black habit rustling in the sudden silence that fell when she turned to face them. She was 42 years old but looked older, the occupation having carved deep lines around her eyes and mouth. Marguerite's voice cut through the morning air like a blade. "You fed them, sister. We all saw it. German soldiers eating at your table while my sister died in a ditch with a bullet in her back." Her hand shook as she pointed, and Sister Marie-Thérèse could see the grief beneath the anger, raw and bleeding even after 2 years. The nun opened her mouth to speak, to explain, but Marguerite was not finished. "You gave them shelter, tended their wounds, smiled at them like they were guests instead of murderers. What do you have to say for yourself?" The crowd pressed closer, and Sister Marie-Thérèse could smell their rage, could feel the weight of 4 years of occupation demanding a reckoning. She thought of trying to explain about Colonel Miller, about the day he had arrived with his wounded men and his cold ultimatum: cooperate or the orphanage burns with the children inside. She thought of the 23 children sleeping upstairs, oblivious to the drama unfolding below, children she had kept alive through the darkest years of the war. But she saw no mercy in these faces, only the need for justice, even if it was the wrong justice aimed at the wrong person. Father Lucien Beaumont pushed through the crowd, his cassock dusty from running. "Stop this madness," he shouted, his voice hoarse. "Sister Marie-Thérèse is innocent. She did what she had to do to protect the children." But his words were drowned out by the crowd's roar. Someone shouted about shaving her head, the traditional punishment for horizontal collaboration. Someone else demanded she be shot. Marguerite raised her hand and silence fell again, heavy and expectant. "We will try her here and now," Marguerite declared. "Let her defend herself if she can." The crowd murmured approval, and Sister Marie-Thérèse felt her legs weaken. She had faced many fears during the occupation, the constant terror of German patrols, the gnawing hunger, the sound of gunfire in the night. But this was different. This was her own people, her own community, turning against her. She had always known it might come to this, had accepted it as the price of keeping the children safe. But now that the moment was here, she found herself desperately wanting to live. Father Beaumont tried again. "Listen to me, all of you. I was here. I saw what happened. Colonel Miller threatened to burn the orphanage if Sister Marie-Thérèse did not cooperate. What would you have had her do? Let the children die?" But Marguerite's face was stone. "My sister was 20 years old," she said quietly. "She had her whole life ahead of her. She died fighting these monsters, and this woman fed them soup." The crowd surged forward, and Sister Marie-Thérèse found herself being dragged from the chapel into the courtyard. The morning sun was bright, painfully bright, and she squinted against it as rough hands pushed her against the courtyard wall. "This is where it ends," she thought. After everything, after all the nights lying awake listening for footsteps, after all the careful rationing to keep the children fed, after all the prayers whispered in the dark, this is how it ends. She closed her eyes and began to pray, not for herself, but for the children, for someone to take care of them when she was gone. A child's scream cut through the chaos. Etienne, 8 years old and small for his age, burst from the orphanage door and threw himself at Sister Marie-Thérèse, wrapping his thin arms around her waist. "Do not hurt her," he sobbed. "She saved us. She saved all of us." Other children began appearing in the doorway, their faces frightened, and the crowd hesitated. Marguerite's expression flickered, something like doubt crossing her features. But then she hardened again. "Take the boy away," she ordered. Before anyone could move, a new voice rang out across the courtyard, speaking French with an American accent. What the hell is going on here? Lieutenant James Hartley of the 101st Airborne Division pushed through the crowd, his Thompson submachine gun slung across his chest, his uniform still dirty from 3 days of street fighting. He was 26 years old, from Ohio, and he had seen enough summary executions in the past week to recognize one in the making. His eyes took in the scene quickly. The nun against the wall, the angry crowd, the terrified children. Someone better start explaining, and fast. Marguerite turned to face him, her chin raised defiantly. This is French business, Lieutenant. This woman collaborated with the Germans. She fed them, sheltered them, betrayed her own people. We are administering justice. Hartley's jaw tightened. He had liberated 3 French towns in the past 2 weeks, and in each one he had seen this same scene play out. Angry crowds and accusations, some justified and some not. He had learned to be careful, to ask questions before allowing passions to dictate justice. Did she collaborate or did she survive? Hartley asked quietly. There is a difference. He looked at Sister Marie-Thérèse, saw the resignation in her eyes, the way she held the child close, and something in his gut told him this was not a collaborator, but a victim of impossible choices. Tell me what happened, sister. All of it. Sister Marie-Thérèse's voice was barely above a whisper. Colonel Heinrich Müller came here in October of 1942. He had 8 wounded soldiers who needed care. He said if I did not take them in, he would burn the orphanage with the children inside. What choice did I have? I fed them from our own rations, tended their wounds, and prayed for their souls. When they left, more came. For 2 years, this orphanage was a German aid station. I hated every moment of it, but I would do it again to keep these children safe. Marguerite's voice was sharp with pain. And while you played nurse to Nazis, French patriots were dying. My sister died, sister. She died fighting for France while you served soup to the enemy. How is that justice? How is that survival? That is collaboration, pure and simple. The crowd murmured agreement, and Hartley could feel the situation slipping toward violence again. He needed to defuse this quickly, but he also needed the truth. Father Beaumont stepped forward again, his voice urgent. Lieutenant, I can vouch for Sister Marie-Thérèse. She never betrayed anyone to the Germans. She never gave them information. She simply kept the children alive. Is that a crime? Should she have let them all die to prove her patriotism? Hartley looked at the priest, then at the nun, then at the children clustering in the doorway. He thought of his own mother, a devout Catholic who had taught Sunday school for 20 years. What would she have done in Sister Marie-Thérèse's place? Private Tommy Sullivan appeared at Hartley's elbow, a gangly 19-year-old from Brooklyn with a talent for finding trouble and food in equal measure. Lieutenant, he said, holding up a dented can of Campbell's chicken noodle soup. Found this in my pack. Thought maybe the kids might want it. He looked around at the tense scene, his expression confused. Did I interrupt something important? The absurdity of the moment, the appearance of an American private offering soup in the middle of a potential execution, broke something in the tension. Hartley almost laughed, but he saw the opportunity and seized it. Private Sullivan, he said loudly, give that soup to Sister Marie-Thérèse. If she is such a collaborator, let her prove it by feeding French children with American rations instead of feeding German soldiers with French bread. Let us see where her loyalties truly lie. Sullivan, still confused but obedient, handed the can to Sister Marie-Thérèse. She took it with shaking hands, staring at it as if it were a miracle. The label was in English, the red and white colors bright and foreign. Etienne looked up at her with wide eyes. Is it real food, sister? Are we going to eat? His voice was so full of hope that several people in the crowd looked away, shame beginning to creep into their anger. Hartley pressed his advantage. How many children are in this orphanage, sister? 23, she answered softly. And how many did you have when the Germans first came? 23, she repeated. Not one lost, not one given up, not one betrayed. I kept them all alive, Lieutenant. That was my collaboration. That was my crime. Keeping children alive in hell. Marguerite's face was working, emotions battling across her features. But you fed the enemy, she said, but her voice had lost its edge. You gave them comfort. Sister Marie-Thérèse met her eyes directly for the first time. I gave them soup and bandages, Marguerite. I gave these children life. Which do you think God will judge me for more harshly? Hartley could see the crowd wavering. He had seen this before. The moment when rage began to transform into doubt, when the thirst for vengeance encountered the complexity of truth, he decided to push further. "How many of you have children?" he asked the crowd. A dozen hands went up slowly. "And how many of you would have done differently in Sister Marie-Thérèse's place? How many of you would have let your children burn to spite the Germans?" Silence answered him, heavy and uncomfortable. A woman near the back of the crowd spoke up, her voice trembling. "My son was here during the occupation. Sister Marie-Thérèse took him in when I could not feed him. She kept him alive. If she had refused the Germans, he would be dead now. Is that what you want, Marguerite? More dead children?" Other voices began to join hers, a slow trickle of support that grew into a stream. Sister Marie-Thérèse had helped many families during the dark years, taking in children when parents could not feed them, sharing what little the orphanage had, never asking for anything in return. Marguerite stood frozen, her certainty crumbling. She looked at Sister Marie-Thérèse, at Etienne clinging to her habit, at the other children watching from the doorway, and something broke inside her. She began to cry, harsh sobs that shook her whole body. "My sister," she gasped. "My beautiful sister." Someone had to pay. Someone had to answer for all of it. Father Beaumont moved to her side, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "The Germans will answer, child. They are answering now. With every mile they retreat. But punishing the innocent will not bring your sister back." Hartley watched as the crowd began to disperse, people drifting away in twos and threes, their anger spent, replaced by exhaustion and shame. He approached Sister Marie-Thérèse, who still stood against the wall, clutching the soup can like a lifeline. "You are safe now, sister," he said gently. "No one is going to hurt you." She looked up at him, and he saw tears streaming down her face. "Thank you, Lieutenant. Thank you for asking questions instead of looking away." Private Sullivan, ever practical, cleared his throat. "So, sister, you want me to help you open that soup? I got a can opener somewhere in my gear. The children could probably use a hot meal." Sister Marie-Thérèse laughed, a sound somewhere between joy and hysteria. "Yes, Private. Yes, please. Let us feed the children. That is all I have ever wanted to do. Feed the children and keep them safe." As Sullivan and Sister Marie-Thérèse headed toward the orphanage kitchen, followed by a stream of excited children, Hartley stood in the courtyard with Father Beaumont. The priest looked exhausted, older than his 50 years. "Thank you, Lieutenant. You saved her life today." Hartley shook his head. "I just asked questions, Father. The truth saved her life. The truth in a can of soup." Father Beaumont smiled sadly. "In times like these, Lieutenant, truth is often the first casualty. Thank you for being willing to search for it." Hartley thought about that as he walked back through the streets of Carentan toward his unit's position. He had been fighting for 3 weeks since D-Day, had seen men die, had killed men himself, had waded through blood and mud and chaos. But this morning, in a small orphanage courtyard, he had learned something important about liberation. It was not just about driving out the Germans. It was about preventing the liberated from destroying themselves in the aftermath. That evening, Hartley returned to the orphanage with more rations, cans of Spam and condensed milk, chocolate bars and cigarettes to trade for fresh bread. Sister Marie-Thérèse met him at the door, and for the first time he saw her smile. "The children are singing, Lieutenant," she said wonderingly. "For the first time in 4 years they are singing. Would you like to hear?" He followed her into the dining hall where 23 children sat around a long table, their faces cleaner than they had been that morning, their eyes brighter. They were singing an old French folk song, their voices high and sweet, and Hartley felt something tight in his chest loosen. Private Sullivan was sitting with Etienne, teaching him English phrases. "This is a chocolate bar," he was saying slowly. "Chocolate bar." Etienne repeated it carefully, then bit into the Hershey bar with an expression of pure bliss. "This is heaven," he declared in French. "The Americans brought heaven in brown paper." Sullivan laughed and ruffled the boy's hair. "You are all right, kid. You are going to be just fine." Sister Marie-Thérèse sat down across from Hartley, her hands folded on the table. "I need to tell you something, Lieutenant. Something I have told no one else." Hartley waited, sensing this was important. "Colonel Mueller," she continued quietly, "the German officer who threatened the orphanage. He came back 3 times during the occupation. Each time he asked me questions about the resistance, about local patriots, about supply routes. Each time I told him nothing. I lied. I misdirected. I pleaded ignorance. He never believed me, but he never pushed too hard either. Why not? Hartley asked. Sister Marie-Thérèse's smile was bitter. Because I think, in his own twisted way, he respected what I was doing. He had children of his own back in Germany. He showed me pictures once, 2 boys and a girl. He said he hoped someone was keeping them safe while he was away at war. It was the only human moment I ever saw from him. After that, he stopped pressing me for information. He just brought his wounded and left. Hartley absorbed this, another layer of complexity in an already complicated story. What happened to him? Sister Marie-Thérèse shook her head. I do not know. He left Carentan 2 weeks before you arrived. I heard he was sent to the Eastern Front. I pray for him sometimes, Lieutenant. Is that wrong? To pray for a man who threatened to burn children alive? Hartley thought about that, about the strange moral landscape of war, where enemies could be human and allies could be monsters, where survival required compromises that peacetime would never understand. I do not think it is wrong, sister, he said finally. I think it is complicated. Everything about this war is complicated. She nodded, relief evident on her face. Thank you for understanding. Thank you for not seeing the world in black and white. Marguerite is not a bad person, Lieutenant. She is just in pain. We are all in pain. We have all lost so much. Hartley looked around the dining hall, at the children eating and laughing, at Private Sullivan making silly faces to entertain them, at Father Beaumont saying grace over a can of Spam. This is what we are fighting for, he thought. Not territory or ideology or national pride. This. Children singing. Nuns feeding the hungry. People choosing mercy over vengeance. This small, fragile, beautiful thing called humanity, persisting in the face of everything trying to destroy it. He felt proud to be part of it, proud to have played even a small role in preserving it. The next morning, Marguerite Lefebvre appeared at the orphanage door. She stood there for a long moment, her face pale, before Sister Marie-Thérèse invited her inside. They sat in the chapel together, 2 women who had survived hell in different ways, and for a long time, neither spoke. Finally, Marguerite broke the silence. I am sorry, sister. I was wrong. I let my grief make me cruel. Sister Marie-Thérèse reached across and took her hand. You were not wrong to grieve, child. You were only wrong to think that more suffering would ease your pain. Marguerite wept then, and Sister Marie-Thérèse held her, this woman who had wanted to kill her just yesterday and offered comfort. When the tears finally subsided, Marguerite asked, How do you do it, sister? How do you forgive? How do you move forward? Sister Marie-Thérèse was quiet for a moment, choosing her words carefully. I do not know if I have forgiven, Marguerite. I do not know if forgiveness is even possible for some things, but I know that hatred is a poison, and I refuse to let it destroy what the war did not. I choose to live. I choose to love these children. I choose to believe that tomorrow can be better than yesterday. That is all any of us can do. Marguerite nodded slowly. Can I help? With the children? I do not know anything about caring for children, but I want to do something good. Something that honors my sister's memory instead of dishonoring yours. Sister Marie-Thérèse smiled. We always need help, child. There is always more work than hands to do it. Come back tomorrow. Bring your strength and your sorrow, and we will put them both to good use. Lieutenant Hartley visited the orphanage several more times before his unit moved out, pushing east toward Paris. Each time he brought what rations he could spare, and each time he saw the children growing stronger, more hopeful. On his last visit, Etienne gave him a drawing, a crayon picture of an American soldier holding a soup can, standing next to a nun and a group of children. It is you, Etienne explained proudly. You are a hero, Lieutenant. Hartley felt his throat tighten. No, kid. Your sister Marie-Thérèse is the hero. I just brought soup. As he prepared to leave Carentan, Hartley stood in the orphanage courtyard one final time, looking at the wall where Sister Marie-Thérèse had nearly been executed. Father Beaumont joined him, following his gaze. It is strange, the priest said quietly, how close we came to committing an injustice in the name of justice. How easily liberation could have become just another kind of tyranny. Hartley nodded. That is why we have to keep asking questions, Father. That is why we have to keep looking for truth, even when lies are easier. Especially when lies are easier. The war continued, grinding eastward through France and into Germany itself. Hartley survived it, though he carried scars both visible and invisible. When he returned home to Ohio in 1946, he brought Etienne's drawing with him, framed it, and hung it in his study. Whenever anyone asked about it, he told them the story of the nun who faced execution in Carentan and the soup can that saved her life. It became his way of remembering that even in the darkest times, humanity could prevail if people were brave enough to choose it. Sister Marie-Thérèse continued running the orphanage for another 20 years, with Marguerite Lefebvre as her assistant and eventually her closest friend. They never spoke of that morning in June 1944, but it remained between them always, a reminder of how close they had come to tragedy, how easily pain could transform into cruelty, how much courage it took to choose mercy instead of vengeance. The children they raised together went out into the world carrying that lesson, spreading it like seeds in soil hungry for hope. In 1964, on the 20th anniversary of D-Day, a package arrived at the orphanage from America. Inside was a case of Campbell's chicken noodle soup and a letter from James Hartley, now a high school principal in Cleveland. Dear Sister Marie-Thérèse, the letter read, I have never forgotten that morning in Carentan, when a can of soup became a symbol of something larger than any of us understood at the time. I hope these cans find you well, and that the children you care for now are as blessed as those I met 20 years ago. You taught me that liberation is not just about defeating enemies, but about preserving our own humanity in the process. Thank you for that lesson. It has guided my life ever since. Sister Marie-Thérèse read the letter to the children at dinner that night, her voice trembling with emotion. Then they opened the soup, heating it on the old stove that had somehow survived the war, and they ate together, remembering and celebrating and giving thanks for the strange grace that had saved them all. Marguerite raised her bowl in a toast. To Sister Marie-Thérèse, she said, to Lieutenant Hartley, to Private Sullivan and his can of soup, to all the small acts of kindness that defeat the great evils of the world. The children echoed her, their voices filling the dining hall with warmth and light. Years later, when Sister Marie-Thérèse was an old woman, bent with age but still sharp of mind, a historian came to interview her about the occupation. He asked her about the hardest moment of those years, expecting her to talk about hunger or fear or the constant threat of violence. Instead, she told him about that morning in June 1944, standing against the courtyard wall, certain she was about to die. That was the hardest moment, she said quietly. Not because I was afraid of death, but because I was afraid my death would mean nothing, that all the children I had saved would be left alone, that my sacrifice would be wasted. But then Lieutenant Hartley asked questions. He looked for truth, and a young private offered soup. Sometimes the smallest gestures carry the greatest weight. The historian pressed her. Do you think you made the right choice, sister? Feeding the Germans to save the children? She was silent for a long time, her gnarled hands folded in her lap. I think, she said finally, that there are no right choices in war. There are only choices and consequences and the courage to live with both. I chose life over death. I chose children over pride. I chose mercy over vengeance. Were those the right choices? I do not know, but they were my choices, and I would make them again. When Sister Marie-Thérèse died in 1978 at the age of 76, her funeral was attended by hundreds of people. Former orphans came from across France and beyond, men and women now with children and grandchildren of their own, all of them owing their existence to a nun who had made impossible choices in impossible times. Marguerite Lefebvre, now gray-haired and stooped, delivered the eulogy. She spoke of courage and compassion, of the strength it takes to forgive, of the wisdom to know that survival is not the same as collaboration. She spoke of a morning in June 1944 when anger nearly triumphed over justice, and how one woman's quiet dignity had helped a town remember its humanity. Etienne, now a doctor with a practice in Paris, placed a can of Campbell's chicken noodle soup on Sister Marie-Thérèse's grave. It was a ritual he repeated every year on the anniversary of the liberation, a symbol of salvation and the strange paths grace takes in times of darkness. Other former orphans began doing the same, until the grave was surrounded by soup cans, a monument to the power of small kindnesses in the face of great evil. In America, James Hartley kept the crayon drawing until his own death in 1989. In his will, he left it to the National World War II Museum in New Orleans, along with a detailed account of that morning in Carentan. It hangs there still, A simple child's drawing that tells a complicated story about war and peace, justice and mercy, the fine line between collaboration and survival. Visitors often stop to read the placard beside it, and many walk away with tears in their eyes, moved by the reminder that even in humanity's darkest hours, there are always people who choose light. The orphanage in Carentan still stands, though it is now a community center serving a different generation of children. On the wall of the main hall hangs a photograph of Sister Marie-Thérèse surrounded by children, her face worn but smiling, her eyes reflecting both the sorrows she had endured and the hope she had never abandoned. Beside it is a framed letter from Lieutenant James Hartley and a vintage Campbell's soup can in a display case. Underneath, a plaque reads, "In memory of those who chose mercy over vengeance, who asked questions instead of rushing to judgment, who understood that liberation means preserving our humanity, not abandoning it. May we all have the courage to bring soup instead of bullets when the world demands blood." The story of Sister Marie-Thérèse and the soup can has been told and retold, becoming part of the collective memory of Carentan and beyond. It is taught in schools as an example of the complexities of occupation and liberation, the moral ambiguities of survival, the importance of seeking truth before rendering judgment. It has been the subject of books and documentaries, plays and poems, each retelling adding new layers of meaning, new insights into the human capacity for both cruelty and compassion. But perhaps the most important legacy of that June morning in 1944 is not found in museums or history books. It is found in the choices made by the children Sister Marie-Thérèse saved, and their children, and their children's children. It is found in the moments when someone chooses to ask questions instead of making assumptions, to offer help instead of condemnation, to believe in redemption instead of revenge. It is found in every small act of kindness that defies the logic of hatred, every gesture of mercy that refuses to let darkness have the final word. Tommy Sullivan, the private who brought the soup can, returned to Brooklyn after the war and opened a small grocery store. He made it a point to donate food to local orphanages and always kept Campbell's chicken noodle soup in stock. When customers asked why he had so much of it, he would tell them about a nun in France and a moment when a simple can of soup became a lifeline. Many of his customers began doing the same, donating soup to those in need, creating a ripple effect of generosity that spread through the neighborhood and beyond. The story reminds us that history is not made only by generals and politicians, by grand strategies and sweeping battles. It is also made by nuns and lieutenants, by children and soup cans, by the countless small decisions that collectively shape the world. It reminds us that in times of crisis, when emotions run high and the thirst for justice threatens to become a hunger for vengeance, the most heroic act may be simply to pause, to ask questions, to seek understanding before rushing to judgment. Sister Marie-Thérèse's story is not unique. Across occupied Europe, thousands of people faced similar impossible choices, forced to collaborate in small ways to survive, to protect loved ones, to preserve some fragment of humanity in an inhuman time. Many of them faced the same accusations after liberation, the same angry crowds, the same demand for immediate justice. Some were guilty of genuine collaboration, of betraying their neighbors for profit or ideology. But many others were like Sister Marie-Thérèse, victims of circumstance who did what they had to do to survive, to protect the vulnerable, to maintain some small space of decency in a world gone mad. The challenge of the liberation was to distinguish between these two groups, to render justice without committing new injustices, to punish the guilty without destroying the innocent. It was a challenge that many communities failed, swept up in the passion of the moment, eager to purge themselves of the occupation's stain through violence and retribution. But in Carentan, on that June morning in 1944, one American lieutenant chose to ask questions, one private chose to offer soup, one nun chose to speak truth, and one community chose to listen. It was not a perfect resolution. There were still wounds that would take years to heal, still suspicions that lingered, still pain that demanded acknowledgement. But it was a start, a first step toward healing, toward justice that served humanity instead of destroying it. In the end, the story of Sister Marie-Thérèse and the soup can is a story about the power of ordinary people to do extraordinary things in extraordinary times. It is about the courage to make hard choices and the wisdom to understand that not all hard choices are wrong. It is about the importance of truth in a world of propaganda and lies. the necessity of mercy in a time of vengeance, the possibility of redemption, even in the darkest hours. Most of all, it is a reminder that liberation is not just a military operation, but a moral challenge, requiring us to preserve our humanity, even as we fight against those who would destroy it. It calls us to be better than our enemies, to choose light over darkness, to bring soup instead of bullets, to ask questions instead of rushing to judgment. These are lessons that transcend time and place, relevant not just to the liberation of France in 1944, but to every moment when we must choose between our better and worse angels, between the easy path of hatred and the hard path of understanding. May we all have the wisdom to choose well, and the courage to live with the consequences of our choices.